Lincoln's main objective in the Civil War was to preserve the Union. This is very important. Okay? His main goal is to preserve the Union, hold it together. And he was willing to go to great lengths to make sure that happened, including restricting the civil rights of individuals. In particular, habeas corpus was suspended. Habeas corpus is a court order that requires that when someone is arrested, they're brought before a judge and explained the reason of their detention. Basically, it prevents people from being held unlawfully. So, with habeas corpus suspended, people could be captured or arrested and held with no explanation as to why they were being held or detained. Also, in terms of war politics, the emancipation of slaves was heavily debated. And Lincoln really tried to remain relatively neutral. He tried not to act on the issue of emancipation until he had really a higher cause to do it. That higher cause came through with the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863. This freed slaves in the Confederacy. Okay? That's important. And this is why. It was a military strategy that ended the South's source of labor. Once the slaves had been emancipated or freed in the South, the South was no longer able to function in terms of its economy. It had lost its source of labor. Also, it's important to note that there were several groups of minorities that served in the Civil War as well. African Americans in particular, and you don't necessarily think of these people as participating, many of them having just been freed from slavery, but yes, they served in the Civil War. One of the more well-known regiments was the 54th Massachusetts African American Regiment that served in the Civil War. And these were segregated forces. They were not integrated with the white regiments. Also, it's important to note that people like Clara Barton and Molly Pitcher served in the Civil War. Of course, Clara Barton was a nurse, a very famous nurse, who founded the American Red Cross, and she was known as the Angel of the Battlefield. Soldiers' lives were very hard. One of the most difficult parts about going to war was the disillusionment. There is always sort of a romance or fantasy about defending your country or defending your beliefs. But once they were actually involved in battle, they were undergoing incredibly stressful, difficult conditions. Some of those conditions were a lack of food, and of course poor hygiene, often inadequate clothing and supplies, and medical care was almost non-existent. People like Clara Barton did of course help, but disease was still the largest cause of death in the Civil War. Also, if you were captured during the Civil War, you were sent to a prison camp, and both the North and the South had prison camps. Andersonville was one of the more famous prison camps. It was in the southern states, part of the Confederacy, and it was a brutal detention camp. We'll actually read a primary source from that as one of our class activities. But that's it for now. We'll talk more specifically about the battles of the Civil War in the next presentation.